The first major land campaign in the Pacific. Date: 7th August 1942, 9th February 1943. Location: Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Belligerents: Imperial Japanese Forces versus United States Marine Corps. And Navy outcome: U.S. victory. Japan's expansion in the Pacific was halted. The Allies won their first major land victory. Guadalcanal, a tiny dot on the map. Yet in 1942 to 1943, it became the knot that tied off the fate of the Pacific. For the United States, newly on the offensive after Midway, it was the first great test. For Japan, it was where the tide of expansion broke. The fighting here was waged not only against jungle and mud, but through night surface battles, a relentless struggle for air superiority, and the grinding attrition of hunger, force comparison, and theater analysis. Overall balance, air superiority. Once the runway on Guadalcanal, Henderson Field, became operational, the U.S. gained a daytime control advantage over the seas and skies around the island. Japan tried to offset this largely with night raids and carrier-borne sorties. Surface warfare proficiency. The Imperial Navy held an edge in night fighting through training and tactics. Its Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes, long range and devastating, were decisive. As the campaign wore on, the U.S. gained momentum with radar, fire control, and better inter-service coordination. Logistics and sustainment. American industrial capacity and rear bases, Espiritu Santo, NUMEA, provided steady resupply. Japan, dependent on the long threatened line from Rabaul, was largely confined to night destroyer runs, the Tokyo Express, for sustainment. Ground combat. U.S. Marines excelled in depth of defense, fire discipline, and combined fire support, artillery plus close air support, giving them stronghold and counterattack capability. Japanese infantry showed great assault courage and infiltration skill, but chronic shortages in supply, medical support, and heavy fires steadily eroded combat power. Terrain, sea, air, theater analysis. Island geography. Dense jungle, swamps, broken ridge lines, e.g. Edson's Ridge, Bloody Ridge. Short lines of sight and pervasive mud hindered large-scale maneuver and favored the defender. Henderson Field effect. The runway became America's flying barrier. Daylight sea movement turned lethal for Japan, driving starvation, disease, and ammunition scarcity among Japanese ground forces. Surrounding waters. Narrow passages and island shadows around Guadalcanal made close-quarters night actions inevitable, showcasing Japanese night fighting prowess through much of the campaign. Weather and disease. Tropical conditions, malaria, dysentery, and climate wear reduced combat effectiveness on both sides. The side with superior logistics, the U.S., recovered faster. Preparation phase. Japan. Strategic objective. Establish an air base along the Guadalcanal Tulagi axis to sever the Australia-U.S. supply corridor. Wear down the United States and force negotiations. Chain of command. Combined fleet. Admiral Izoroku, Yamamoto Army. Lieutenant General Haruyoshi Hayakatake Fleet. 8th Fleet. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa Ground. Elements: Ichiki Detachment, Kawaguchi Group, Maruyama Group. Reinforcements. Elements of the 2nd Division. Total force. Personnel deployed to the island. Approximately 30,000 to 36,000 naval platforms. Numerous cruisers, Audi destroyers. Continuous night resupply via Tokyo Express aircraft. Sortie rates. In the hundreds from Rabaul and carriers, unable to penetrate deeply around the island by day due to Henderson Field. Logistics plan. Because of U.S. daytime air pressure, conduct resupply only at night with destroyers. Aim to rip out the beachhead quickly with shock attacks. United States strategic objective: seize the runway and operate it as Henderson Field. Use daylight air superiority to choke Japanese resupply. Convert post-Midway momentum into lasting initiative. Chain of Command: Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz. South Pacific Area, Admiral Robert L. Gormley. Until October 1942. ADMS William F. Halsey. Expeditionary Ground Force: Maginot Gengen Alexander A. Vandegrift. 1st Marine Division, USMC. Carrier Task Groups, ADMs: Frank Jack Fletcher, early phase, Admiral Thomas Kincaid, at Savo Island. Air Component is Cactus Air Force. Total Force: Initial Ground Strength, August 1942, approximately 16,000 to 19,000 USMC. By early 1943, approximately 50,000 to 60,000 plus, including Americal Division, 25th Infantry Division reinforcements, naval platforms, 3 fleet carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, Wasp, plus numerous cruisers/destroyers, plus 60 plus, landing/supply ships, Henderson Field aircraft. First 2 weeks, 40 to 60. Later, 80 to 120 plus, day-to-day fluctuations. Logistics plan: get the runway operational immediately. Deploy air units. Impose a daylight sea barrier to cut Japanese resupply. Hold with radar, artillery, and perimeter defenses. Course of the campaign: 7 to 9, August 1942. The landing and the Savo shock. U.S. Marines came ashore on Guadalcanal and Tulagi, seized the unfinished airfield, and hastily threw up perimeter defenses. On the night of 8th to 9th August, at the Battle of Savo Island, Japanese cruisers ambushed the Allied covering force and inflicted heavy losses. This naval defeat weakened sea cover for the troops ashore and made the supply line fragile. Even so, the beachhead held and works on the runway continued. 20 August 1942. Henderson Field operational. The runway entered service as Henderson Field, and the Cactus Air Force began daylight patrols. With daylight air superiority, Japanese forces could scarcely approach in open water during the day. Resupply was pushed into the night, and dependence on the Tokyo Express deepened. 21st August 1942. Tanaru, Alligator Creek. Colonel Ichiki's hastily dispatched detachment launched a frontal assault along the Tanaru line. Coordinated machine gun, mortar, and artillery fires shattered the attack. The Ichiki unit was largely destroyed. It was the first clear sign that the quick result doctrine had failed. 24th to 25th August 1942. Battle of the Eastern Solomons. In carrier combat, the Japanese Ryujo was sunk and other elements damaged. Japan's attempt to run large-scale transports to Guadalcanal was badly mauled. Together with Henderson Field, the U.S. consolidated an edge in regional air logistics balance. 12 to 14 September 1942. Edson's Ridge, Bloody Ridge. Kawaguchi's troops pressed a series of night attacks along the ridge to break into Henderson. The Marines, at close quarters, broke the assaults with concentrated fire, grenades, and hand-to-hand fighting. Holding the critical high ground, kept the airfield alive, and sustained the daylight air umbrella. 11 to 12 October 1942. Cape Inesperance. U.S. surface forces used radar and disciplined gunnery to bloody Japanese cruisers and destroyers in night action. On 13 to 15 October, Japanese battleships heavily bombarded Henderson Field, temporarily knocking it out. Repair crews restored the runway by dawn, and the daylight barrier resumed. 23rd to 26th October 1942. Ground assaults on Henderson's and the Battle of Santa Cruz. Japanese ground offensives failed against trench lines and coordinated fires. On 26 October at Santa Cruz, the U.S. lost USS Hornet, and Enterprise was damaged. Yet because the island defense held, daylight control of sea and air around Guadalcanal remained with the U.S., and Japanese resupply stayed confined to the night. 12th to 15th November, 1942, Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Across 2 nights of close-range chaos, both sides suffered heavy ship losses. Japanese battleships Hiei and Kirishima were sunk. Japanese transport convoys were scattered. The few ships that reached the beaches were destroyed by day from air and shore. Japanese ground forces failed to receive critical supply and began to wither. 30 November, 1942. Passafaronga. Japanese destroyers scored a tactical success, crippling U.S. cruisers with long lance torpedoes. But the tonnage delivered was meager and did not alter the strategic picture. U.S. daylight air control continued to choke seaborne logistics. December 1942. January 1943. Attrition. Relentless daylight air patrols and artillery fire drove Japanese resupply to a bare minimum. On the island, Japanese units rapidly weakened from hunger, malaria, and ammunition shortages. Tokyo Express runs became both riskier and insufficient. U.S. defenses stiffened as fortifications and sortie rates rose. 1 to 9, February 1943, Operation Kyo, evacuation. Japanese command opted to withdraw remaining forces in staged night destroyer runs. The evacuation was executed with relative success, leaving heavy equipment behind. On the 9th of February 1943, Guadalcanal passed fully into Allied hands, marking the formal start of Japan's strategic retreat in the Southeast Pacific. Losses and numerical assessment. United States, approximately 7,000 plus killed. Major naval losses included the fleet carriers USS Wasp and USS Hornet, plus multiple cruisers and destroyers. Heavy aircraft losses. However, U.S. industrial capacity and manpower kept replacement rates sustainable. Japan. Tens of thousands of casualties in and around the island, driven by combat, starvation, and disease. Loss of key surface combatants, including the light carrier Ryujo and the battleships Hiei and Kirishima. Hundreds of aircraft lost and, most critically, the irreplaceable veteran air crews and naval personnel who flew and maintained them. Note, because the campaign stretched over many months and across multiple domains, exact figures vary by source. The balance is clear. The U.S. sustained fewer losses relative to its replenishable force structure, while Japan suffered a lasting erosion of skilled personnel and resupply capacity. Strategic and psychological effects. Strategic. Japan's southward expansion was decisively halted. Continuous operations from Henderson Field imposed daylight sea control, strangling Japanese resupply. The loss of veteran Japanese naval and air personnel created a quality gap that proved irrecoverable in later battles. The U.S. rapidly matured in radar employment, night fighting, and joint operations. The initiative shifted permanently to the Allies. Psychological. Among U.S. forces, a durable conviction set in. We can endure, and we can win. The Cactus Air Force became legend. On the Japanese side, Guadalcanal equals the island of hunger took hold. Morale visibly eroded. For Allied publics, Guadalcanal symbolized the beginning of the comeback on land, the companion to Midway at sea, the beginning of a Pacific turning point. Guadalcanal ceased to be a small tropical island. It became the place where the Pacific balance changed for good. Not only positions but strategies shifted. Japan was forced from offense to defense, while the United States moved from defense to relentless attack. The invincible fleet shaken at Midway, collapsed at Guadalcanal. Henderson Field became more than a runway. It was the emblem of daylight sea control and sustainable logistics. Every Cactus Air Force sortie made each crate on the Tokyo Express scarcer and every night run more dangerous. Night, close-quarters naval battles showcased both the value of radar and the lethality of Japanese long-lance torpedoes. By day, air superiority emerged as the decisive factor. This campaign became a textbook of modern joint warfare. Amphibious assault, forward base construction, the synchronization of land-sea air power, and above all, logistics, hunger, malaria, ammunition, and fuel balances revealed how staff planning decides fate on the ground. When Marine stubbornness in the trenches combined with the attritional pressure of naval and air power, the strategic picture changed irreversibly. From Guadalcanal, the line ran to New Georgia, Colombangara, Vela La Vela, Bougainville, then on to the Gilberts Marshalls and the Marianas. This island was the first great milestone of the Pacific island hopping strategy. When Guadalcanal passed fully to Allied control, on the 9th of February 1943, it marked not just a victory, but the beginning of Japan's retreat and America's systematic advance. In the end, Guadalcanal is a small name on a map, but on history's scale, it was the lever that toppled an empire's weight. What was won there was not only ground, but initiative, and that initiative rewrote the fate of the Pacific.